Sunday the 6th of August, we're in church, and word on the street, you know, the sort of whispering was, oh, something's kicking off, and there's trouble down in Tottenham. By this point, you know, various policemen and people were getting calls as people realised that something rather big was kicking off. By the time we got home, Sunday afternoon, Sunday evening, the news had caught up with what was happening, and people were aware that the riots were happening, that buildings were burning, and that you know, Tottenham was in chaos, basically. The moment I heard about it, I thought I need to really stand with my friends here in Tottenham. On the Monday night, the 8th of August, they were due to have a prayer vigil on this spot, and we're saying this isn't what London is about, this isn't what Tottenham is about, and that there are people who just want to make a stand and say this shouldn't be happening. We were told, come to this event, but come at your own risk, because there's trouble brewing. But the Christians were determined to pray and to gather here. So this is Tottenham High Road behind me, and the night we came to pray here, this road was completely closed off. Countless shops and businesses that have been smashed up, looted, and even burnt down, and it just looked like a war zone. That's the only way of describing it. So, you know, we were stood here talking, chatting to the Christians around, listening to the talks that were happening. You could feel the tension. You could hear people, you know, shouting and arguing around the edge. By this point, there weren't many police around at all. They were all at quite a distance, and it just felt like, oh, something's going to go down here. And then at that point, we started to pray. And the moment that the Christians started to pray, the atmosphere started to change, and you started to feel a peace that was in the air as opposed to the tension. And it was like, how can you describe it? It's almost like the heavy atmosphere that was over the place just unfolded and a peace came. But that didn't last. What would happen is suddenly somebody would start shouting something, or would try and disrupt, or they would actually start disagreeing with the prayers. And the moment that we stopped praying, things started getting bad again. So you could start to feel the atmosphere closing in. You could start to feel the fear and the evil literally in the air. So a few of us that were at the back here just started to form a circle. And as we stood in this circle, we started to sing. And as we started to sing those hymns, the atmosphere started to change again. And the heaviness in the air lifted, and the peace kind of literally started to come down again. And you just felt things change. And then while we're praying, and there was a cameraman there, I believe they were from Channel 4, and he was filming us praying. And while we were praying, this huge guy walked up, grabbed hold of the camera on its tripod and threw it down in the middle of the circle. And then he was kind of like marching round, very angry, very cross that we were praying, cross that it was being filmed. And then he broke into the middle of the circle, picked the camera up by the tripod leg, and threw it out of the circle to the ground over there, and then just started marching around the circle. So I started praying, saying, God, what do we do in this situation? And I felt God very clearly say to me, pray that the enemy turns against himself. At that point, one of the other guys who'd been inciting trouble earlier walked around the corner, saw this bloke, and started shouting at him. And then they literally started fighting just here. And they would walk and they would fight at the same time. And I'm saying, God, you're answering my prayer literally as I'm speaking. And at this point, they ran off round the corner, and the atmosphere just opened up again and everything calmed down. And by that point, it felt like we'd done enough, that we couldn't do any more here, but that there wasn't going to be trouble kicking off, and that we could have, we'd made our stand for peace, and we'd seen the difference. The very site in which this prayer vigil took place was here at High Cross in Tottenham. This was a medieval wayside cross. It's a place where Christians have gathered for thousands of years, and it seems very appropriate that it's here we should come and pray and once again stand out as Christians on the streets, in the marketplace, and be praying. And the challenge for me is that as Christians we pray, and we pray for half an hour or we pray for an hour, whereas actually what needs to happen is we need to be praying for hours. We need to get out on the streets. We need to pray so that wherever we pray, the atmosphere changes. The following day, things were kicking off all over London. There were all kinds of trouble happening. I had a meeting that day with the borough commander, and I said, can we pray as Christians in Enfield in the town square tonight? Because I was affronted by the violence, and I thought, I can't just stand here and do nothing. We have to gather and pray. And so on the following night, we managed to gather 10 different churches, and we stood together in the market square and we prayed. And we prayed that peace would come to Enfield. And Enfield was full of people looking for trouble or with nothing to do. But as we prayed, the people around just started to disappear, and they started to go home, and they got bored because nothing was happening. When the riots had all been cleared up and everything was over, I actually got a letter from the police, and it said this. It says, we believe that corporate prayer went some way to reducing the tension on the streets. And I was very excited by that, because that was policemen who don't necessarily believe in God, recognising that when Christians pray, things change.